Usually, players think it's all about gameplay, but what if I told you that Deadlock beats Concord because of one key element that most players overlook? Today we're breaking down exactly how Deadlock dominated the hero shooter space and left Concord in the dust. If you've ever played a hero shooter, you know how critical characters are. It's not just about cool looks. Designs directly impacts gameplay, immersion, and the game's overall success. Even small details can make or break a game. And 8 years for Concord is no small amount of time. Especially for the gaming industry, everything is very rapidly paced. So bringing something that was introduced 8 years ago needs to offer something new, as well as knowing what appeals to the target audience. And this is where passion is tied in. Every game needs passion from its developers. Passion is where creativity is born, but this feels quite lacking with Concord. The game puts the characters at the forefront of the experience, but they fail to tell us about the game or even about themselves. They lack intention. When it comes to character-driven games, characters should be made with the intent of sparking curiosity from the players and communicating who they are without using any words. Like, when you choose a character in a new game, you pick the one that fits into a class that you want to play, like a tank, support, fighter, and you also pick the most appealing and intriguing one to you, the one that makes you question what they do and is appealing enough to make you want to play them. And games like this need to master intrigue. A player needs to be intrigued enough to choose your character, otherwise you lose interest almost immediately. Intrigue can most simply be created when something normal is paired with something unusual, like Wrecking Ball in Overwatch. He's a small hamster paired with a giant mech, and the name reinforces the interest in the character. It raises questions like, why is this tiny hamster in a massive machine? And the name Wrecking Ball makes you wonder what this character does, since his appearance is rather sweet and not very intimidating. And this is something that Deadlock at least attempts to do in every design. Even ones that are slightly weaker, like Grey Talon, still mixes this idea of having an older character being an archer, which is something that is quite rare in games. However, it was stated that this character is just a placeholder and will get reworked soon, so it's interesting to see what they may do with this base. So currently, Deadlock has 19 characters, and most of them are unique and instantly recognizable. Wraith is a great example of communicating design effectively. Just looking at her, you can tell she means business. With her gang-like outfit and her hat covering her face, she has this very mysterious feel to her. And without playing the game, it's safe to assume that she's an assassin who completes a task and disappears into the shadows. She also has a very large gun with a drum on it that looks pretty heavy, so she might be still quite slow. But then you can also see that she has these cards that she uses, which I'm guessing might be similar to Twisted Fate in League of Legends, who uses his cards to stun enemies, damage them, and also teleport away, which balances out this weakness, so it's not something that is too game-changing, but also can be managed with cooldowns. And something where you have to take a more strategic approach. Since she's relatively small, she's also probably pretty squishy, meaning if she's spotted from far away, she's an easy target, so you have to be wise with entry and exit points, a bit like Sombra in Overwatch, who relies more on flanking and picking off enemies. You have her teleporting abilities, as well as going invisible, so you can get in and out of situations, but you have to be very wise about where you pick off the enemies so that others don't see you. And then Sombra also has this immobilizing ability, which allows her to make targets more vulnerable. Perhaps Wraith is quite similar in this regard. But back to her overall design, the chain and clothes also suggest some level of aristocracy. Perhaps like a gang leader, which has a very inspired Peaky Blinders kind of feel of the early 1900s Birmingham or perhaps London. which makes it all the more memorable when you can draw a specific archetype from the character. And I think we can compare this to Concord's Buzz, which I think is similar in terms of being some kind of assassin based on her weapon. But this is a lot harder to tell, because her design is very loud and noticeable, which fits the whole retro-futurism theme going on, but it clashes with her role. The design isn't very visually harmonic either. The coats and shoes look very bulky, and her tight, latexy looking pants are not flexible for someone who's supposed to run in and out of a situation without being noticed. Maybe if they took a more gothic approach it would have looked better, but it's not very inspired either, and there's no clear archetype that she follows. Archetypes are basically the language that characters speak. That's why many characters feel familiar in games. When a character doesn't follow an archetype, in this case the assassin, it is very hard to understand the character's traits, as they're not what you expect. And this leads to confusion, which is one of the last things that you want for a player, because this can instantly ruin the gameplay experience. There is a very fine line to where we try to understand something and where we give up. But in general, even the fundamentals here are clashing. Baz's design has a very inconsistent shape language. Like, look at Sombra's silhouette. You can see all the sharp lines in harmony, but Baz has a clash with her large shoulder pads, which are sharp but round, and then also her large round hair, which comes across as a bit more friendly and welcoming. But for a dangerous character, you want to lean towards using more sharper shapes, because this makes the character seem a bit more intimidating and scary, because assassins are simply not supposed to be friendly, at least to their enemies. And Wraith, on the other hand, does just this. You can see that she has this very large trench coat over her shoulders, which makes her a lot more imposing as it gives her a bigger silhouette. And her entire design uses these sharp, hard edges. Even the hat on her head is very bold and sharp. The real brilliance of Deadlock is in its consistent yet varied art style. Every character feels like they belong in the same world, yet they still bring their flavor to the game. And the game is stylized, so it also works well for these more expressive or humorous designs like Warden. Overall, it gives a very Team Fortress 2 look. And you can see that the appropriate research was done for this to work, and the team was given the creative freedom to test and iterate. Concord, on the other hand, struggles with the art style. It has this retro futurism style, like Guardians of the Galaxy or Farscape, that it aspires to be like, but it looks far too silly to be realistic. When it comes to style, there's stylization and realism. Realism has to, of course, feel realistic. This means neutral colors, and if it's fantasy, it still has to look familiar. Hence why aliens look like insects, especially beetles, praying mantises, and moths. Stylization is basically everything else, with no rules other than having to still be believable. But there's a lot more that you can get away with, given that you have a very strong understanding in fundamentals. When something realistic isn't believable, it's what we call the uncanny valley. That's where you would specifically put characters like Starchild. For the rest of the designs, they should have been stylized because there's nothing realistic in the colors or themes, so it all looks very unappealing. Even games that are supposed to be fun and silly, like Saints Row, commit to enough realism to make the previous games in the series believable. Maybe Concord had a communication issue, where higher-ups probably wanted a hyper-realistic Overwatch clone, and everyone else maybe wanted something that was fun and stylized, and they tried their best to stray away from this. But even the narrative doesn't help much with this, as hyper-realistic games often suit a demographic that is a bit older, so you would expect to see a game that perhaps deals with a lot more complex themes, or something that is a bit more mature. However, Concord feels like it's very much trying to fit into the PG range. It's very friendly for a shooter game. Even Overwatch was rated teen because it still wanted to deal with a complex story and some things that were simply a bit too scary for younger audiences. And you can see every design is made with that age range in mind. Of course, when you make a game that is suited for all age ranges, it will get a larger audience because you're appealing to a larger amount of people, but this also means that it has to look the part, as well as understanding what this demographic likes, as it's not one design fits all in most cases. That's why there's only a handful of companies that are able to achieve this. Take a look at Nintendo, which, whatever age you are, you can appreciate a good Nintendo game. It's not too serious or too baby-like either. And Deadlock understands its audience. It knows that its player base craves for something more than just an interesting face. Beyond visuals, Deadlock's characters, abilities, and narratives are baked right into their designs. Look at Lady Geist, for example. She speaks a story without words. Just looking at her, you can tell that she's a femme fatale with a disease on her arm that's taking over her body. And she's trying to restrict it with a clamp. This suggests that this disease could change her forever if she lets it take over her whole body. And you can see how it makes her arm look. It's very noticeable, it's green, it's crooked, and it looks quite unappealing in comparison to the rest of her design. That's why she tucks it behind her mink. Again, it sparks a lot of intrigue, like where she got this disease from, and how it's impacting her and what it does to other people. Another reason why Deadlock became more successful than Concord is because of their marketing strategy. Even though the characters are supposed to be at the forefront of the game for Concord, they still tried to sell the game by showing us gameplay rather than trying to sell us on the characters and the story. Which is ironic because the gameplay doesn't offer anything new other than what we're used to for hero shooter games. In comparison to Deadlock, which doesn't even have a trailer, was very successful through its silent marketing. They used the technique of exclusivity as a way to promote their game. It was passed around through word of mouth, but everyone wanted it because it was rare. It's something that you couldn't easily get unless you had an invite to play this game. And it is something quite rare to see nowadays where you have ads everywhere and things always getting pushed into your face. Deadlock allowed the players to discover the game themselves. And it's great to see what the game has achieved so far. Hopefully it continues to deliver what it has promised. With a very saturated genre, it will still take a lot of new content, updates, and so much more to beat Overwatch in its past success. Making it free to play was another great move, but even games like Paladins have failed because of not being able to continuously add new content and adding pay-to-win features. They had a very solid game, but there was no direction to where to take it to the next level to forever distinguish itself amongst the genre.